Hello, and welcome to a very exciting and first episode of Almost Woodworking. Today I've curated 5 ridiculous stories from my life as a woodworker. This is dangerous. Right now I'm safe in my wood shop, and everything's at working height. I got all the best tools that I have around me, and no one else is here to bother me, so I am my own island. But it's when woodworkers leave their shop that ridiculous situations can happen. This first story I'm going to tell you about, I call the unflushed truth. And it starts in a penthouse suite of a new condo building. Now, the developer had a son, and he lived in the penthouse, and he was fitting out the whole place. It was a mixed bag of kitchen, bathroom, furniture, large door, things like that. And I don't know if he had a job or not, but he had an assistant. And the assistant would do all sorts of things for him, from like running to the storage locker or driving him up to cottage country, and then dropping him off and then waiting for a phone call to then pick him up. But he would also do atypical things, I would say, like empty his bathwater. And what really caught me off guard is the tenant wouldn't flush his own toilet. So every day I would come into the site and there would be a toilet full of, and this was every day. And I just never got over the fact that flushing your own toilet would be beneath you. I don't know how you get around that. Why would you want that odor just to linger in your house? It made me realize that I was working in a strange service industry and I didn't know what the norm was anymore. What do you think? The next story I'm going to tell you about, I call the exploding jewelry box. Once upon a time, I had a girlfriend and I made a jewelry box for her, made out of East Indian rosewood, cherry, teak, and bloodwood. And she really liked it. But over time, the relationship kind of ran its course, and we decided to part. Now, it was around 11:30 or midnight, maybe, and we were kind of debriefing about what went wrong or why the relationship was ending, and it came to a discussion level where all of a sudden that jewelry box was being completely emptied, and then it was bravely marching off to the balcony. I followed to see what I knew was eventually going to be happening. And she reached the balcony, raised it up, and then threw it off the balcony. It fell 4 stories and then exploded on a curb into a bunch of pieces. Now, I was actually kind of prepared for this kind of scenario from an awful 4th grade teacher I had. I'd gotten in trouble with a buddy of mine, and we were forced to write out a number of things that we had done wrong and why we shouldn't have done it and how we'll improve in the future. And when my friend had finished his paper, the teacher promptly ripped it up in his face, and that guy burst into tears. And then, me witnessing the scenario that was like eventually going to be my own, I just was prepared, and okay, it's going to get ripped up, that's fine. And he ripped it up, and there wasn't as much of an experience as my buddy had. So when this jewelry box flew off the balcony and hit the ground and exploded, I was actually kind of okay with it because it wasn't mine. Like, I'd given it away. I'd severed any sort of like attachment to it. But anyways, now there's all these pieces on the ground. This is a box that I can reclaim. So I head down, I collect all the pieces, I reassemble it, and now I'm the proud owner of a nice jewelry box. So if you're ever wondering if a jewelry box can withstand a 4-story drop, the answer is no. But if you make it out of quality materials, you can rebuild it. This next story I call the perfect seal. I was working for myself, fitting out someone's kitchen, and it was the last day of install. The last thing I had to do was caulk between the island and the floor, the cabinets in the wall, and the countertop. I get about 2 squeezes out of the gun, and my handle snaps. I guess it was a super old caulking gun. It didn't owe me anything anyways, but the metal oxidized and it snapped. Now, I worked for myself and I didn't want to come back another day. I didn't want to rush out to the store, so I came up with this solution. And I actually got really good at it, and it was really easy to use. I mean, I threw the gun out after this, but I saved the day, saved myself time and money, and there you go. This next story I call Terms and Conditions. I got a client who reached out to me looking for a California king-size bed. They had seen a design of something I was building lately for another client, and they wanted to discuss that. So when I showed up for the meeting, we discussed the existing bed frame, but they also proposed their own design and their own bed frame. what happened at the end of the meeting was we eventually decided on building their design, and they gave me the deposit, and I took off. About 2 weeks later, I show up with the bed made, and I install it. Now, the husband also had his buddy there who was a general contractor, and I'm not sure what he was doing there. Maybe he was having a meeting of his own. Maybe he was there to check up on quality of my work. I'm not really sure. But anyways, the client pays me the balance of the money, and I look in the envelope, discreetly at a separate time, and it was short $400. Now, I waited until his buddy meandered off, and then I brought it up that it was short the money, and he was like, apologetic about it, and e-transferred me on the spot. But I was always curious about whether that was intentional or not. So if you ever get paid, always count the money. That's your moment of truth. If you leave and then say it's short, there's going to be a dispute there, and you leave yourself open for that. Now, that's not the end of the story. The next day, the wife reaches out to me, and she says, "Hey, Robin, we really appreciate your work. We don't want to keep this bed frame. We really want to go with the other bed frame design that you make." So I say, "Hey, that's fine, no problem. I can do the other bed frame for you. It's $5,000 for that, and let me know when you want to hand over a deposit." And obviously, she wasn't keen for that. She says, "No, we really want to return this bed frame. And, it's a custom design. It was their design. I could barely even assemble it in my shop. There's nowhere for me to store it. I don't think so. This is not going to happen." So I said, I can't return it, but if anyone ever asks me about it, then I can get in touch with you and see if we can return it that way. Well, how would you handle that? What would you do? This last story is my favorite, and it's the story of Donato and John. Now, I met Donato and John at a full house renovation. I was doing a bunch of millwork at the house, and Donato and John are masons, and John works for Donato. Now, Donato's a bit of a cruel bastard, and he was always essentially verbally abusing John. And just to give some perspective, I'm in my late 20s at the time, and Donato's probably 60, and John's probably really close behind him, like late 50s or something like that. But Donato is always hammering John. If John says anything, and he barely said anything, he would just get sniped immediately. The first instance I'm going to give you an example of was Donato was cutting an opening in an existing masonry wall. He had no respirator on, no glasses, just him and a concrete saw, just breathing in all the dust and silica powder and all that crap. And it was in the backyard, and I decided I'm getting the heck out of here. So I leave the backyard, and I come back when everything's cooled off and done. And John is, he's got a drop sheet, and he's like shaking it out, the dust out of it, and folding it up. And Donato says, "What the f***'s with all this dust, John?" And I just couldn't believe it, because the guy had been huffing silica powder for like 2 minutes straight. But poor John, who's trying to help out and clean up for the day, just gets hammered immediately with a shitty attitude. Now, there was another instance I'll tell you about where we got occupancy, and the client had moved in, and the son who lived there was frequently going back and forth to the garage to smoke dope. And it would happen so often, and it would be like, probably every hour or so he's going there. And what happened was, it started to become like a kind of a joke among the trades there, is when he's coming back to get ripped again. And Donato asked John, "Hey, what do you call that thing?" And he was referring to the bong the client's son was using. And John, who is Jamaican, referred to it as a chillum. He said it's a chillum. And then Donato, wasting no time at all, just completely waiting for John to stick his neck out, he says, "I knew you knew what that was, John. I knew it. That's why you are the way you are. You smoked too much of that shit when you were a kid." And man, it was honestly, as a late 20s male, pretty humorous to see, these old men just go at each other all the time. But it really is abuse and verbal abuse in the workplace. And, there's no HR department in a 2-man masonry company. So, if you ever get caught in a situation where you're working with a total asshole, just get out of there. There's going to be another work. It's not worth it. I don't ever know whatever happened to Donato and John. Based on how much abuse that guy was getting, though, I wouldn't be surprised if John hit him over the back of the head with a shovel and buried him in a concrete footing or something like that. It was bad. And so bad even that the neighbors next door were starting to complain to the head GC about all the verbal abuse that was going on. So that's it, guys. That's the end of my stories. Stay in the shop, stay where you're safe, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks. Love that sound.